Definitely gonna need wine for this one. Game 4, Leafs versus Bruins, and Bruins take the win yet again, and the series is now 3-1 to Boston. When does the pain end? Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Victoria and I talk all things Toronto sports from Scotland, and today we're talking, unfortunately, about Game 4 of this Leafs versus Bruins series. It was the worst game so far. It felt almost like an elimination game, like as close to an elimination game as you can possibly get. The Leafs were at home, they were in Toronto. They had a crowd which, at least to start off with, seemed to have a really good vibe to them and seemed to be pretty loud. And I hated the way they played last night. I absolutely hated it. It's definitely the worst they've had. Some other people, I think, thought Game 1 was worse. In my opinion, this one was much worse because this was much more must-win. The Leafs are used to losing Game 1s. They didn't have to win last night, but they've made life so incredibly difficult for themselves now with that loss last night. And it wasn't even just a loss just because Boston were better. Boston were better last night by far, but the Leafs really, I feel like, really let themselves down last night. And not to discount them completely, because they now need to win the next 3 in a row, and while that's definitely possible, and there's been many instances in Stanley Cup playoffs before where a team has come back in a series from 3-1 down, we all know this, but if they play the way they did last night, I don't see it happening. They would need to play a lot better. Problem in the first place was the special teams. It was the power play, along with some very shaky, inconsistent goaltending that were the biggest problems. Nylander was back, which was fantastic to see, and Nylander is one of the only players that I have something nice to say about their performance last night, because I thought for his first game back he had some really good chances. I quite liked the way he looked. Austin Matthews has been dealing with some sort of illness, food poisoning by the sound of it, and then he didn't come back for the third period last night. But I still thought Austin looked, decent, given that he was clearly battling through an illness. But anyway, to take a closer look at the periods. Period 1 starts off and the first penalty was on Boston. They had a too many men call, which is always just a really, really dumb penalty to take, but the Leafs got a power play out of it. However, if you were watching it, you probably wouldn't think it was a power play, because the Leafs didn't look like they had a man advantage to start off that power play. It was really bad, and at this point the Leafs were only 1 for 11 in the power play in that series so far. They did get a couple shots on target, but it was overall very, very weak. Boston then were given an advantage and Mitch Marner was given a penalty. I really liked Nyes on this penalty kill. He really stood out to me. I thought he had a really good read on the puck and he made a really good play. I really liked how he looked. I really like Matthew Nyes in general, and he's definitely someone that I've got higher praise for in this series. I have liked how he's looked. But anyway, the Leafs did clear the penalty and their PK has been kind of weak, but they cleared it, so whatever. The game goes on. It wasn't a particularly overly physical game in my opinion compared to what other games had looked like. I feel like the Leafs were just really lacking something last night. They didn't look very inspired. They definitely didn't look like they were playing an almost must-win game in my opinion. We had some 4-on-4 hockey for a while too. Both Pat Maroon and Joel Edmondson got penalties, and so I love 4-on-4 hockey. I just love the space it creates. I really like it. I really enjoy it. And then Brody drew a penalty for the Leafs, and so it was 4-on-3, and I'm like, right, surely they've got to do something here. And they had the core 4 starting the power play. I'm like, this is going to be good. This is going to be it. It was not. It was not. They had that for... It was less than a minute, I want to say 53 seconds. They had that, and then it was just back to a regular power play. It was back to 5-on-4, which they still couldn't score on, so couldn't score even strength, couldn't score 5-on-4, couldn't score 4-on-4, couldn't score 4-on-3. Then, still one of the worst parts of this game, James Van Riemsdyk, of all people, the ex-Leaf, he scores on what was a terrible giveaway from Reeves. It was just really bad. I don't know if Reeves was trying to pass it over to Edmondson and there was some disconnect, but terrible giveaway from Reeves. You can't be doing that so close to the net. It was a really big mistake. A really, really costly mistake. And Van Riemsdyk scores. The Leafs just looked really like they were lacking urgency in that first period. It was such a crucial game and I just expected so much more from them, to be honest. I really thought they'd look better than that. Going into period 2, they did get a couple decent chances to start off. Domi gets a penalty. We all know the score by now. We all know the script. Marchand scores a power play goal. Then Pastrnak gets a goal. And then in period 2, we have probably the biggest talking point from this game, outside of the fact that the Leafs are now 3-1 down in the series, which was the very frustrated Leafs bench, where we saw both Austin Matthews and William Nylander having a go at Mitch Marner, and that was a certainly entertaining thing to see. And I was a little surprised to see it because I'm not sure I've ever seen Austin and stuff going in on someone like that on the bench. And I did like to see that frustration because, you know what, we were also frustrated and you guys were causing it. And Mitch Marner, I just don't understand why he's been so lacking in this series. And while he single-handedly hasn't lost anything for the Leafs because it is a team sport, one of your core forwards can't be performing at that level. Tavares gets a lot of stick, but my thing with Tavares is that he is paid more than his value, which will sort itself soon enough when his contract is up. The problem is that Mitch Marner is going to be looking for more money with his next contract. Just to touch on for a second, I am really gobsmacked by the lack of compassion that people have for players. Players are still people, and if they are ill or injured in any way, just because they are very well paid athletes doesn't mean that they're invincible. And if someone has food poisoning, maybe they're not able to play properly. Do you think that any of us could play a game of hockey in the NHL with food poisoning? Because I bet we couldn't. In fact, I would doubt most of us could do our normal day jobs with food poisoning. The same with migraines. I personally have never had migraines, but I know how badly they can affect people. Just a real lack of compassion. And I'm not saying it's an excuse for the Leafs losing, because it's not. And in my opinion, Matthews and Nylander were both okay last night. I think they were okay, especially given the circumstances. Mitch Marner, as far as we know anyway, doesn't have any ongoing injury, and he has been just invisible for the majority of this playoff series. And so I understand why there was frustration on the bench. I really do understand it. And stop fucking crying, bro. was probably the highlight of that game for me, because there wasn't a lot else that could be a highlight. Going into period 3, I won't lie, I don't really have that much to touch on here. Joseph Woll replaced Samsonov, which I don't think Samsonov was really the problem, but at the same time, he's just such an inconsistent goalie. He's not like the best playoff goalie you can have. The Leafs at this point were out-goalied by Boston. Swayman is just absolutely unreal, as is Ullmark, so I wouldn't have marked who they had in. They are also out-coached because Sheldon Keefe, what are you doing? They just generally were completely outplayed. But anyway, speaking of, Mitch Marner did score the Leafs' only goal last night. And I don't think that makes up for the fact that he's been lacking in this series, because in game 3 he did make that incredible pass, which I did talk about, and I really loved that. I just don't think he's showcased what he can do at all. I really don't think he has, and I find it really disappointing. And just because someone scores a goal doesn't erase all their other flaws, I don't think. I think hockey is much wider than just someone scoring one goal in a series, and it makes them, an elite player playing at their best. But there's a lot of discourse going on today about Mitch Marner, and unfortunately, he's definitely, for me, been the weakest out of the core for sure, but we'll see what happens there. I feel like the Mitch Marner thing was probably the biggest talking point of the game last night. There's a lot of contention with it. Mitch Marner hasn't lost the games on his own, but he also hasn't been consistently doing enough for me to help the team. The Leafs outshot the Bruins 25-22. The Leafs won more face-offs, and they're still 0 for 3 on the power play. The power play continues to be the biggest issue this Leafs team has had this playoffs. This is probably one of the weakest playoff teams they've had in a few years. I saw people comparing last night's game to the Montreal series back in 2021, and there are definitely some parallels there, unfortunately, and no one needs to be reminded of that. It is still possible that the Leafs do it. They need to win the next 3 in a row, and I think they definitely have the potential to do it if the goaltending is on point. I don't know if they just go with Wall to start, because Samsonov's been looking too inconsistent. He's had some really good games, but he's just been all over the place. It's been too up and down. So I don't know if you start Wall. I also just think, unless you're going to score in the power play, what's the point? You need to be capitalising on those opportunities, otherwise they're just slipping through your fingers. So I'm intrigued to see how Tuesday's going to go, because it's likely that Tuesday will either be potentially the start of a Leafs comeback, which is obviously what I'm rooting for, and which I know they can do, but whether they will do it is a different story. It's either that, or it's going to be probably the end of an era in a way for the Leafs. I can't see Sheldon Keefe's position being tenable. I can't see him staying on. I just can't see it. And I've always liked Sheldon Keefe. Even some of his comments after the game last night, I wasn't completely sure of. He was denying there was any frustration, and he was also painting an image that the Leafs had put full effort in, which I just don't think was the case, because I didn't see 100% effort from everybody last night in a game where there should have been 110% effort. So I'm not too sure what those quotes were about, but it's not looking good for Sheldon Keefe. It's not looking good for the Leafs, but we'll see. We'll see how Tuesday goes. I'm not really looking forward to Tuesday, if I'm totally honest. So those are all my thoughts for Game 4. That was just such a bad game. It was just awful. Awful. I was so tempted to go to bed at one point, but I stuck through until the bitter end. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought of Game 4. What do you think the future of the Leafs looks like? What do you think are potential changes that might happen if the series does end on Tuesday? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back soon with more Toronto sports chats from across the pond. Bye guys. But I must try to figure it out alone. Yeah, I must try.